Hello, this is Joanna Toch. This is the Family Law Cafe podcast. It's the podcast where I get to talk to people in the network that we have at Family Law Cafe. At Family Law Cafe, we are here to help you with your family law problem. And that can mean that you need access to other experts. I don't claim to be an expert in much other than being a family lawyer. That's it. But people often think that that means that I know about debt collection, I know about therapy. I mean, I know bits because I'm involved in your family law case, but what I prefer to do is get you onto the Family Law Cafe platform and then help you with your legal matters and then introduce you to the people that you need to help you with other matters. So my guest today is Clayton M Coke. His business is called the Late Payments Company. Can be very useful if, of course, you are looking to be paid and haven't been paid. He is also he also has a podcast, and it's called the Cashflow Show. He's been going for a long time, so I'm going to be covering both grounds. I think he's an incredibly interesting person. You know, you wouldn't think there's a connection there, so we're going to be finding out what the connection is. So welcome, Clayton.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Joanne. Thank you.
And if you had chosen to introduce yourself, and you now have the opportunity, how would you introduce you?
I'm Clayton M Coke. I am the host of the Cashflow Show podcast, but I'm also the CEO of the Late Payments Company.
Okay, so you put the podcast first. Is that your first love, or is that how people identify with you?
I think it's softer.
Yeah.
I think we will come back into during the discussion about late payments and debt and so on and so forth. I'm very aware of the emotion that brings.
Yeah.
And how people are wedded to how, you know, people talk about love being a 4-letter word. You know, debt is a 4-letter word as well.
Do you have it on your knuckles?
The love and debt, yeah. No, sadly not. But the reality.
Oh, dear.
I'm the tattoos that not for me.
Yeah.
However, I do understand the sensitivity that's attached to money and debt and payments and so on and so forth. So sometimes it's just good to ease people in gently.
Yeah. So, you know, so when you're, you know, at parties and networking about what I collect debt, it's probably not going to be the best received introduction.
Well, people have a perception, and a lot of perception is from movies.
Mm-hmm.
So you either get the sort of lock, stock, 2 smoking barrels, Vinnie Jones coming around to collect money, or you get the recent reality programs, you know, the sheriffs are coming, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So people then make a formulation of what they believe to be what your world is.
Yeah.
And it's not as messy as that, or it's not as uncouth as that. It doesn't, you know, it's not full of very uncouth. People are very surprised because when they see me, they think, "Oh, I didn't think that you'd be involved in that." And they then ask what the background is and what the journey is, and then they then say, "Oh, I see what you do."
Yeah. So guess what? I'm going to ask you about your background and your journey. But before that, what's one surprising fact about you that we don't know?
I've got an encyclopedic knowledge of music from 1950 to 2000.
Wow. So I can ask you any question.
Well,
I want to get my brother here and put him up against you because he's ridiculous. So he's like, he will know the B-sides of the Beatles 1963 and Yesterday. Seriously, he will.
Yeah.
Are you kind of that guy?
I'm that kind of I'm that person. I'm the phone a friend on whatever.
You've got the wrong member of the family.
Yeah, I think I'm that person. Yeah. I'm the person that you would ask for that question, and I would say, for example, if it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I would make a decent phone a friend if you've got that question.
Yeah, if you've got those questions. Yeah. Okay. And is that what got you into the podcasting, your love of music and sound?
Yes, to a certain extent. I think I've always had an interest in radio. As a child, I was very much addicted to the radio in a big way. I listened to the radio literally morning, noon, and night. And that's how I got the encyclopedic knowledge of music, because I listened to the radio so much. However, I've always felt that in terms of broadcasting, the idea of being able to broadcast, even the idea of being in a podcast studio such as this, is something that you could never have done 20 years ago. The cost of the equipment and the ability, the computer processing power, wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah.
You just couldn't have done it. So now that's been democratized to a certain extent. We now find ourselves in a position where everybody can do it, although I say that not everybody should do it.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that it gives you an opportunity to express yourself and to put a point across a point or a point of view that maybe other people don't have.
And if people don't like it, move on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Want to listen to this one? It's fine. There's a million out there.
Exactly. You know, I've got a friend who's got a bird watching podcast.
Yeah.
You know, which is
probably really popular.
It is
it's
incredibly popular. Yeah. Incredibly popular. I envy the popularity of a bird watching podcast. There you go.
Twitchers.
Yes, indeed, twitchers. Well, that's the technical term.
Oh, right. So, yeah, I don't want to go. Yeah. Anyway, I want to ask you then, because I know from talking to you that well, I don't know if I'm a South London. My family came from South London. We went out to, the countryside. We came back to South London. You're a South London person.
Yes, I'm a Southeast London, Lewisham. So big shout out to everybody from Lewisham and surrounding areas. Yeah. So yeah, I've always been a South London guy.
And so, in terms of the dealing with the debt, so I understand that way back you worked in Somerset House, didn't you? In the legal, you were lawyer?
Many years ago. Yeah. I'll go back to the very beginning because it always makes sense. I suppose I got to a stage and I was in the careers office. I needed to find out what I was going to do with my life. It wasn't a case of finding yourself in a West Indian household in that period of time. My mum wanted you to have a plan. My dad wanted you to have a plan. So I was looking through this box of cards and this thing called a legal executive. I thought, oh, I like that. Okay. That's me. That is. I could be that guy. Yeah. So
was it your choice, or do you think they wanted you to do it?
No, not necessarily. I think it was always my choice.
They just wanted you to have something that you were going to do.
Exactly. And I think the law has always fascinated me, and we've had a discussion about this before. I was hooked on the law from, 9, 10 years old. I knew that I wanted to be in the law doing something. And I was hooked on Crown Court, and we've had our discussion about
that, the television program of the day.
Yes, Crown Court. Yeah, they've tried to revive it, but
we're going to do it. We'll do it.
Yeah, Crown Court was immensely influential, and so was another program called Petrocelli, which was on BBC on Friday nights. And so the legal profession, and especially the way that American lawyers work, very much that grandstanding. I really love that. So that's what drove me to want to get involved in the legal profession. I then basically started up being an outdoor clerk, which I don't know if they actually even exist anymore. But
I don't think they do, because I did that too. An outdoor clerk is someone that sat behind the barrister. Is that what you were doing?
Yes, but also you were a runner as well. And so if they wanted something delivered up to the court,
with a file.
Running up in the rain, in the cold, in the snow, in the wind, or whatever it was, and you were doing it. So. But it allowed you to get around the court. It allowed you to go to the land registry, pick things up, and you built your reputation. You developed your reputation and your skills. So then I decided, okay, fair enough. I'd done that for a little while, and I thought maybe I should do something that's slightly different. So I went along to the what was it? The Lord Chancellor's Department. Okay. That's what it was at the time. It's something else now. Yeah. But and then I joined the divorce registry, which is the principal registry of the family division.
Principal registry, and it was in Somerset House.
That's
right. And it was all these tiny little rooms, and I used to be running down there as a barrister and doing. So you were one of the clerks there.
Exactly. Okay. So I worked upstairs in a room called F62, which is first floor, room 62. And you can actually now go to Somerset House. I think
it's a hotel now.
Yeah, it's a hotel, and they exhibit art and all types of things. So it really is kind of, and I just looking at it, oh my God, and I can imagine where I was. So I did that for a couple of years.
And when were you there?
Oh my God. I would say that it would have been 84, 85, that type of thing.
Wow.
It must have been.
Back.
way back, as a,
I think it was before I started
Yeah,
family law. I was
yeah.
doing crime then.
must have been about then.
Well, it was before I was a barrister. I wasn't
Yeah,
a barrister to
yeah,
88.
yeah. So it was
Okay.
around that time. So I stayed a couple of years, and that was really good because I still
Yeah.
had contact with the legal profession, even though I wasn't necessarily in it.
Mm.
And then I got the opportunity to work at the London Borough of Hackney as a legal assistant there.
What was that like? London
That
Borough of Hackney.
those were dangerous times. Those were dangerous times. Anybody who knows Hackney in the mid to late 80s, going into the early 90s, no, it was a pretty rough town.
Yeah.
It was very, very rough. In fact, a lot of people don't know that you used to have what was called Hackney Factor. So even amongst local governments across the whole of, say, London, you got an extra notch.
Yeah.
And I think it was danger money.
So were you paid more?
Yeah.
You were paid more for working for
Yeah,
Hackney?
yeah. Because they wanted to attract people, because people would think
no one would
no,
work
nobody
there.
would do it. But I rose up to the challenge.
Oh,
I took on the challenge and I went for it. So I spent sort of 10,
That's
11
very tough then, I think, because it was, I don't know, that borough was just, it was a tough place to work.
It was messy, because the problem with Hackney, and the difference between Hackney and Westminster, was Hackney people thought that the staff were corrupt, but in Westminster people thought that the management were corrupt. So it was a different level and perception, because Westminster was going through some very interesting situations at that time. Yeah. So it was hard. You know, I remember what made me end up leaving Hackney, or making attempts to leave Hackney, was effectively they called us in to the town hall one day, and they said, "Oh, we've got some news to tell you." And I said, "Oh, right." You know, I was thinking more money, but they were telling us, "Oh, sorry, no, that's not going to happen. You might not get paid this month."
Oh, wow. Oh, dear.
Yeah, so
you might not get paid.
Yeah, you might not get paid. That was a shocker.
Yeah.
And it made me realize that there were no permanent jobs ever, because I was brought up. My parents are Jamaican, both my parents, and they came over here, Windrush generation, 1962. So the idea was, if you worked in the bank, you worked for central government or local government, you'd made it.
Yeah.
You'd made it. You were safe. You know, you could stay there, you'd get your pension, you get your holidays and whatever. And then there's somebody from Hackney telling me,
you might not get paid.
You might not
and
get
you
paid.
thought you're working for local government.
Correct.
And they can't pay you.
Exactly.
But when you were there, what were you doing?
I was basically a legal exec and legal assistant. So that was the title.
And what department?
And that was in, the room that I was in was common law, which is that we did all the civil litigation effectively. Yeah. So a lot of the work was rent arrears, housing, squatters.
So all the legal work for the council, you were helping with that. So that involved people squatting in buildings that you'd have to try and evict them.
Yes, correct.
People not paying their rent. You'd have to try and get them to pay their rent. So you were probably meeting people under a great deal of distress.
Oh, definitely, without a doubt. I mean, a lot of those people were, because of the economic times and the fact that Hackney had a lot of disrepair, had a lot of property disrepair, because obviously a lot of those were Victorian properties that had been allowed to run down, stuff that had been bombed out in the war, etc., etc. So it was very, very challenging, because we were always getting sued. The director of housing literally had to have a bag packed ready just in case he was going to get committed.
Oh dear! My goodness!
It was. Yeah. I mean, you know, there were times when we couldn't get photocopying paper. We had to write on the back of stuff. It was pretty rough. Yeah. And I then came to the conclusion at some point. I thought, if I can make it here, not like Frank Sinatra, I can make it anywhere.
I can make it. It's probably much more true than anywhere else.
Exactly.
I survived Hackney.
Exactly. And so by being able to survive that, that made me think, okay, I can do stuff. I can move on.
So did you go from there to setting up your own business?
No. After the trauma.
Yeah, the trauma. So what made you leave? Was it they just didn't pay you, or you just thought, no, not enough?
No, we got over that
Yeah,
hurdle,
yeah.
and the council did survive. Because, you know, recently we've had councils that have basically fallen into a situation where they've effectively become bankrupt.
Yeah, like my local council.
Right.
It is bankrupt.
Right. Now,
Really?
Hackney had always
Oh,
threatened
dear.
to go bankrupt,
Yeah.
but it never did.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that was the key
It's
thing.
on the edge.
But that kind of level of anxiety, I thought, you know, something, this is too much for me now. I need to find something a bit more solid, or just move away from it. So I got fed up with the law.
So this is a lawyer working for Hackney,
Yeah.
who's had enough of the worries and the stress. So we're not talking about the people living in the properties.
No.
The actual lawyer. Help me. Yeah.
Because I truly believe that when you get involved in these things, we all have different types of energy. There's positive, negative energy. We're all made up of electrons and all different bits and pieces. And one of the key things for me is, if you're surrounded by lots of negative energy, you begin to absorb it. And I found that after a while, I thought, no, this is too much for me.
Yeah, research has shown that, hasn't it?
Of course, yeah.
That, and I was listening to another podcast. You probably heard this, but they the way they showed that was that they got people to sweat into something, and they got people to sweat either by healthy exercise, and then they got people to sweat by doing like skydiving, where they were terrified.
Yes.
And so people, I mean, it's an unsurprising result, but when you put people near to that, smelling that sweat of fear, that affected people greatly, whereas the sweat of success and working out, and that again affected people's mood. So unsurprising, someone paid someone to do that. But anyway, that's a known factor. But you knew that anyway from working at Hackney.
Of course. I realized that there came a point where I had to move away, and I decided that, right, I'm going to give that up, and I'm just going to do something different. However, very much like, who is it? Is it Robert De Niro, or is it Al Pacino? Al Pacino in The Godfather 3. I kept trying to pull away, and they kept pulling me back in.
Get him back.
So I couldn't shake off that legal side of my work life.
Yeah.
So one day I got this call, because I'd signed up for Bainlock and Clark, the recruitment consultants.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we've got this job. It's in Hatfield. From South London, Hatfield. That sounds like the country, man. So I'm opening up the map, and I'm thinking, okay. Yeah. And I'm thinking, So it was a job that they said was debt recovery, and I'd never done pure debt recovery, just some of it. So I thought, okay. They said, you know, so just give it a try, 3 months, and needed some cash. So I got on the train and got there, and I thought, okay, this is a bit, this isn't local, is it? We're not in Kansas anymore. So I then decided, right, okay, I'm going to stick it out. But I found I enjoyed it. And I found actually that I was very good at it, very effective at it. And as time went on, I did a bit more. And 2 years later, we're still there. Yeah. And in the end, they said, well, we're going to have to let you go. And I said, okay. And they said, why? I said, you've got no more work. You've done all the work.
You've got in those
You've
debts.
got all the money.
Okay. You've been too good at your job.
Yeah. So, you know, you've done, I remember the lady saying to me, you've done yourself out of a job. And I thought, well, fair enough. You know, I've done it. I've proved to myself I can do it. And that was the start of the original company, which is at that time PRMS. So that was in existence, and still is in the background for 22 years. Wow. And in that time, obviously, we've honed our skills, started to work with more people, and redefined what it is to do late payments and debt recovery over that period of time.
So what makes someone who's not paying their debts start paying?
I don't think you can make somebody pay something. I think the fact is, most people do not want to pay for something they've never had.
Right, okay.
That's the key thing.
Okay.
Or if they've had something and it's not been of the quality or doesn't have the value that they expected, that's one of the main reasons. Okay. Now, you will get dodgy people. There are certain people who go with the express intent of not wanting to pay people. But those people are few and far between. Yeah. Most people now value their reputation. However, things are different now. So I mentioned earlier about this, for example, the sheriff. Once upon a time, you would ask the sheriff to go along, and people would be scared of the sheriff.
Yeah.
The sheriff shot himself in the foot, literally. You know, and not I shot the sheriff as Bob Marley, but the sheriff shot himself in the foot because everybody knew or now knows how the sheriff works.
Okay.
So the mystique and the ability to have a certain veil over how they worked has changed. So they're not as effective as they used to be. They would probably tell me something completely different. But that's one of those things. So in terms of getting money from people, a lot of people now are quite happy to run up debt, being bankrupt. For example, take somebody like Katie Price, also known as Jordan. She's always been bankrupt, but nothing seems to happen. And when you see people writing about her in the comments, when there's an article, people just are not clicking the fact that why is she still existing as a person after owing all this money?
Yeah, why is she?
Who knows?
Yeah,
I don't know what arrangement
I
she
think I
appears to
saw
have made.
something. She was on holiday
Yes,
and openly, and where she was supposed to be in court.
Yeah.
Doesn't,
Really,
it's kind of not usual behaviour. Though,
it's
is it?
not usual behaviour, but
No.
however, I don't know what arrangement she's made. I don't know what
Mhm.
arrangement she's made with
Is
her
it the full
creditors,
story? Yeah.
etc., etc. However, people choose not to pay for a multitude of reasons, but most people genuinely want to pay or find a way to pay. There's still a good gene within human beings that says, I want to pay this money. I don't want to owe you this debt.
So do you say that you tap into that, do you think? What makes you effective?
What makes me effective? I understand how people think. That's what's important.
God, that's a big claim. You do, really? Well, what's the trick? I need to learn it.
But no, I mean, I understand how people think.
Yeah.
Most people have desires.
Yeah.
You know, some people want to be rich. Some people want to be famous. Some people want to be left alone. Some people just want a cup of tea. Everybody wants something, and it's understanding why people do the things that they do.
So you're taking the psychological approach, which
of
people don't think, they don't associate these two things, do they? Debt recovery, psychology, but they should, shouldn't they? Because
of course they should.
you're thinking about it. You're not just blundering in, and so presumably your approach to everyone is different.
Of course, it has to be. You can't approach everybody in exactly the same way because everybody wants a different outcome. Some people want to end the business relationship straight away. I'll never do business with him again. Yeah, stuff him, I'm off.
Yeah.
There are some people say, well, you know, this is a good deal for both of us, you know, but if we can just get around it, and they work with you as a mediator.
I was about to say, so does it help to have you, because sometimes there's an embarrassment or people don't, as you say, they might have a reason they don't want to pay, but they can't explain it to the other person.
Correct. You need that, what I refer to as Obama diplomacy.
Oh, okay.
You need that person that comes in and basically says, okay, there's an elephant in the room and it's a big, big problem. And we can resolve this. So let's go ahead, resolve it, work it out. And it's in Asian countries, say China, Japan, it's the idea of saving face. And we don't necessarily refer to it that often in Western countries. But saving face is really what you're trying to do for the most part. Nobody wants to admit that they can't pay. Nobody wants to admit that they're desperate for money.
Yeah, that's true. Well, if they admit they're desperate for money, then that could affect their ability to make other transactions.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
That's the British way. The British way is, I'd really like you to pay me, please, but you know, if you've got any difficulties, just carry on. That's the British way. Whereas the American way is, hey, buddy, you owe me 50 grand. You need to pay up.
Yeah.
That's the American style, which is much more direct.
Yeah. So, so many questions. So, have you ever worked in different countries? Have you worked in America, for example?
No, I've never worked in America. They've got guns.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to be there.
No. So most of my work has been in the UK, and I'm quite happy with that. You often have slight transactions or slight detours where you're dealing with people maybe in Europe and so on and so forth. And that's just great. When somebody's gone to America or somebody's gone to Brazil, you're kissing that money pretty much goodbye.
Yeah. And are there times when you would say to people, you're not going to get anything from this one?
Oh, yes. I remember there's a lady who is a client and very wonderful woman, and she wanted to pursue a particular case, which she probably could have won. But the amount of money she would have spent completely defeated the object. Completely defeated the object.
Yeah.
And what I said was, I think you need to spend that money on a new handbag. You'll feel a lot better for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the amount of money she would have invested, she probably wouldn't have got back. At least have something that you can take some pleasure from, rather than wasting money than something that you'll never ever get back.
I suppose, having taken advice from you, she can be clear in her mind. Okay, I'm leaving that one. I've made a decision about it, because I think I would not like someone owing me money, because it would make me feel. It would make me feel bad about if someone owed me money, I'd feel kind of angry about that.
Of
And
course.
it would eat at me.
It's
Sorry, it
natural.
would.
It's
Anyone that
natural.
owes me money, pay up.
It's
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah.
However, when I was a kid, my dad used to watch a program called The Sweeney.
Oh yeah.
And what was interesting about The Sweeney, something that my dad used to say was, he said, "You know something? You know why I like this Sweeney? The reason why I like this Sweeney is that the bad guy sometimes gets away." And that's, unfortunately, there are certain people.
It was real.
Yeah,
He was seeing.
Yeah, he was seeing the reality of it.
Yeah.
And the fact is
That's
that
true. I kind of remember that program. It was such a great program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sometimes the bad guys get away, and that's where the difficulty is.
Mm.
There are certain people who are still locked into my memory now, people that have got away, and I still think about them, and I think, that person, and I use an expletive or two, which I'm not going to use on your show, and I'm angry about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes they just get away. There are sometimes the bad guys just get away.
But I'd rather, so coming back to me, I'd rather, if I was going to write off something, I'd rather make that decision myself than let them win. I'm just a bit competitive there. Do you see what I mean?
And
I think if someone said to me, "You're not going to get that," okay, because there's things that have happened in my life, and I'm not going to do anything about it, because you can't. And it's the same with, people come to me with, they've got a claim. Just because you have a claim doesn't mean to say you should follow that through.
Of course, the problem that most people don't understand is that when people get advice, the person that gives them advice has skin in the game or doesn't have skin in the game. And it depends on which approach they have. If they're already invested because they think they're going to be paid, they're going to give you some outcome. I would rather not take your money rather than basically waste time on a claim that's getting nowhere. And that's the mistake that's, because you've seen some cases and you've been reading in the newspaper and you think to yourself, why is this case in court? Who actually took this case on? But the problem is a barrister or solicitor might say, everybody deserves a defense.
Well, I just think about family law and the fact, just speaking to somebody yesterday, I said, "How much have you actually paid?" And it was over $1 million.
Of course, it's a fortune. I mean,
and it just, why?
well,
Because I didn't see the benefit. I
because
asked for,
because people's emotions are
yeah,
involved.
their emotions are engaged.
And the fact is, I remember going to Norwich County Court, and I had a case, and it was a litigation case. It wasn't anything to do with family. And I got in, and I was dressed in a particular way, and he thought I was counsel. So I got in, and he goes, "Are you a lawyer?" I thought, yeah. He goes, "Yeah, I had problems with a lawyer. I had a divorce, and it took all my money. And, I can't stand lawyers." And I said, "You know something? I'm sorry about your experience, and you had a bad experience. My advice has always been, if you're in that type of situation, leave the relationship, go to Brazil. They got nice women there." Because the amount of money that you will spend on basically trying to level the playing field of your emotions.
Well, you can't be spending money like that. If you have a family law problem, this is what I'm trying to help people with, is just come to us, we'll give you an honest view. And there are things, yes, do spend your money on, or spend a limited amount, or set your budget, but you don't have to argue every point, because if you do that, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but
often.
people are arguing the point, not really about the kids, not really about
No,
the
it's
school.
never about
It's
that.
all about the
Yeah.
fact is you've gone off with that girl and she's got longer legs than me and she's got a bigger bosom than me. And the fact is you've been messing about with her beforehand, etc., etc., etc. That's what's really.
Yeah, it's usually about the power imbalance.
Of course it is.
Often. So talking about then, so people engage you when they have, money owed to them. Tell me this, how do people allow that amount of money to build up? What's your thoughts on that?
It's back to the discussion that we had earlier about American and British attitudes. The British attitude of not wanting to ask for money allows money to escalate or allows debt to escalate.
Being polite.
Yeah, being polite. And the fact is, it's the idea of, especially a lot of businesses build on friendship. And really, friendship and business do not mix unless you have respect as a dividing line.
Yeah.
And what happens is that a lot of people don't have respect for other people. Because, when you look on LinkedIn and you have a view of what's going on there, people are pretty ruthless and people are about getting the money that they want. So what people do, I had a client, for example, he would always allow debts to escalate because he would say, but Clayton, they're good for the money. I said, obviously they're not that good for the money because they haven't paid you.
Also, I wonder, do you think about a lack of confidence that people are allowing this debt to build up because they're not confident enough to actually, you need to pay me before I do anything
I think what it is that I don't think there's a lack of confidence. It's a lack of being able to walk away. And I always say, whatever relationship that you get involved in, whether it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, whatever, if you can't at some point say, I can walk away for this, you're not in a negotiation.
Yeah.
You're in a hostage situation.
You're not in a position of strength, are you? I mean, the way my business model is, and this will put off some people, people come to us and I work out how much it's going to cost. Yes. I say, okay, so, and sometimes I will say, what is your budget? People don't seem to think that that's important. It is important. It's like, don't spend more than you have, generally. So I say, no, never spend more than you have. But some people may need to borrow money and there's a return on their investment, and I will explain that to them. But I might say, this is going to cost you, and it will cost you 20,000. And then people go. And I know that what's happened, they've gone to another lawyer who said, okay, so come in and it will be, £500 to give it advice. But they never explain how much it's all going to cost. And that's the problem that people have, particularly in family law, that they underestimate the costs and they start a case and then they get involved and then they suddenly get a bill after a couple of months. And when lawyers are slow to bill, so I ask for my money up front, and that can be off-putting for people, but at least it's honest. And I'm not prepared to just pull them along when they can't really afford it.
Of course, but the problem with family situations is it is just a deep, unending hole that you are throwing money down. And when you are honest enough and you've told somebody this is how much it's going to cost, which is what I always do, I'm brutally honest. I'll just tell you straight, you've got no flaming chance. This is not, it's never going to happen. But what people do is, and this is why certain solicitors have great difficulty in getting paid, is because they are not necessarily upfront. They tell you what you need to know at that particular time. And they say, oh, you need money for this. Whereas I set out from the very beginning, from the onset, you'll need money for court fees. You'll need money for our fees. You'll need money for sheriff's fees. You're going to need money for whatever it is that you need. The problem is, in advance. So if you want to walk away now, walk away. Don't get involved in it. From the time that I send out an initial letter, I tell you, this is the journey you're going on. If you can bail out at any point, but this is what you're going to or likely to be able to be in the hole for in order to achieve this. And this is your chance of recovery. So I think your business model is a good one, but it's a shock for people who are not necessarily, they know that using a lawyer is going to be expensive, but don't necessarily realize this is why these celebrity divorces, who do you think pays for that?
Well, I mean, I don't even think it's a question of celebrity. I think that some people are very sensible with money. Other people are just not financially literate. And
Right.
I don't blame them because we're not really taught about this at school.
Of course.
And you know, if you're fortunate, you have parents who educate you, or you know, you have the right upbringing. Uh, and I know that if people come to us, they will say probably it'll be 25% of what they would otherwise spend.
Yes.
And it's really sad that when people sometimes come to us, they've already spent huge amounts of money, which they didn't need to spend. It's actually got them nowhere. And there's a lot of confusion. And then some people are so scared of spending any money that they're going to places and doing it themselves, and probably ending up with a settlement which isn't as good as if they'd actually used a lawyer. So it's everyone has. Well, it would be really helpful for there to be more availability to educate people on financial literacy. I mean, do you think that we are financially literate as a country? I mean,
Well,
I
no,
don't think we are.
no, because remember, it's the way that the country is structured. If you come from a certain background, you are taught money management, you are taught about wealth, you're taught about trusts, you're taught about investments. You know, these are the
Do you
things.
think it's a background thing?
Of course, it's
Do
totally
you
a background
do?
thing.
Were you taught about these things?
No,
I wasn't.
I
I had a good example in my father who was very competent, but he didn't teach me anything.
no, I mean,
Yeah.
what I learned is that, I learned is that you earned money, you spent less than you earned,
Well, that's
and
a
you saved.
big lesson.
Well, that's
A
the
lot.
biggest lesson.
That probably took you a lot further than a lot of people.
Of course, but it's also taught
Yeah.
you not to necessarily be reckless.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of, my dad's generation where a lot of people bought houses, a lot of people had houses and stuff like that. So that was really good. But a lot of people then came unstuck when it came to inheritance tax planning.
Just didn't have the knowledge.
Of
Probably.
course not.
Yeah,
And that was the
yeah.
thing. A lot of people, you're going to have a serious wealth transfer in the next few years
Yeah.
for people of my parents' generation who then didn't have understand the 7 year rule and stuff like that. So all of these things are, if you don't have the background and you're not taught these things, you are taught to save, but you're not taught to invest.
Yeah.
That type of thing. All of these things
You had
together.
basic level. I've been reflecting recently because my father was very successful, but because I was the girl and the youngest, I just think he it was just traditional. He didn't think that I had any need for any of that knowledge. So
Well, no,
no knowledge was imparted.
well,
So
it
I didn't
wouldn't
have a
be.
clue.
It wouldn't be because his knowledge was, you're a nice lady. I brought you up well. You're going to meet a nice
married,
husband,
that's
and you're going to
it.
get married, and that's going to be your husband. And his father should have taught him that, etc., etc. Obviously, we're in the 21st century now, and I've got a lady that was on my podcast, who she specializes in helping people, or women, purely specifically women, understand finances and understand investment.
Which leads me onto your podcast, because we could talk about this all day, and it really is interesting because I see so many people's disclosure documents, and absolutely it's not what you earn, it's how you manage your money. Oh my goodness, the debt that people can be in, and they can be double high earners and in massive debt.
Of course.
And there's just nothing to share, whereas I've done cases where people have had only, very, very simple basic jobs, hospital porter, one comes to mind, all of this work. And there had been an inheritance in that case, but it was about 20 years ago. And I remember with the other barrister, we were saying, this is £1 million case. I'm like, yeah, there's £1 million in this, because they'd been so frugal. I mean, it was mentioned in the divorce petition that he was mean. So, but the benefit of that was, and he did offer to make me a cup of tea, and he did ask if I wanted to share a tea bag. So that guy, but he had amassed great wealth, but he had never earned more than about 22,000 ever.
Yeah,
but it just shows how financial knowledge. Anyway, but moving on.
I'm sorry, it's the sharing the tea bag that's not.
It was when we got back to the office, having finished the case. When we got back to the office, they said, "Shall I make you a cup of tea?" I thought, "Oh, that'd be nice. Thank you so much." I said, should we share a tea bag? I was like, I get it. I get it. I get it. Why there was £1 million.
Okay, I'm going to stop laughing now.
Your podcast. So you started that how?
Oh my God.
10 years ago?
No, 7 years ago, I started the
Mm-hmm.
Cashflow Show.
Mm-hmm.
The original intent was to be a public facing, softer focus idea of what late payments was about.
Yeah.
That was the original plan.
Cashflow Show.
However, as time went on, it's kind of grown legs and walked in a slightly different direction. In some form, it's still about business. It's more about entrepreneurship, and we talk about money. Yeah, well, our next episode is going to be a big deep dive into saving money in terms of your business and so on and so forth. But I wanted it to be more a reflection of business owners and entrepreneurs. I wanted to tell people stories because I believe that there are too many stories there which are heavily edited to just have the highlights.
Yeah, I just love listening to the stories. I mean, you have loads of interesting people and people that have businesses that I wouldn't have even thought about. That's what I think is really interesting, if you don't mind me saying, that I'm like, oh, that's a business. Oh, and they've succeeded in that. And they're, I want to say everyday. I mean, you see these podcasts that have billionaires, and that's great, isn't it?
That's great.
But their stories, a bit like when I do big money cases, it's all a bit samey. You know, it's not difficult to do a big money case because there's lots of money. It's actually really difficult to do a small money case where you've got to find the money. Again, 5-star hotels are kind of all the same, whereas 3-star hotels are often a little bit different and they've got different special things. So what's interesting is the people that you have, their stories are so much more interesting.
Of course they are. Because the problem with most very rich people is that they were already rich in the beginning. And that's one thing you learn about when you start to see people.
They always say they weren't. They had a struggle. And
yeah, of course. I was in the ghetto. No, you were not. You know, you had an investment fund, you had a trust fund. But nobody wants to hear about the hero's journey where the hero was loaded to start off with. I was loaded, the end.
But you've got really good stories which people can relate to.
Indeed. Hopefully. But they're also about failure. What did you do? When did you realize that those 4 direct debits were going to bounce? That's business.
Yeah.
You know, I remember going to an Evening Standard event, and I really can't remember this guy's name. I've tried for years to try. But he said something, it was an Irish guy, and he said, there's no good business, there's no bad business, it's just business. And I want to encourage a certain amount of openness. And for people to be honest and say, do you know something, Clayton? I tried everything and it went to pot. It was just an absolute mess. But then for some strange reason, I met somebody in the lift. They offered me an opportunity and here I am.
Yeah. It's, you know, I'm just still learning. It's just all a big learning exercise because I find that, you know, you just think everything's going fine and they're like, oh yeah. And then you see and you just got to get up and do it all over again, keep going.
Entrepreneurship is navigating problems on a daily basis. That's all you do.
Yeah.
I don't think there is any kind of secret path. I don't think there is any Mount Everest or whatever the case may be. It's not. You get up every day and every day there's a new problem. Whether it's at the end of the day, you need to get a new member of staff or you need a new photocopier or you need a new bank account or you need to... Something happens every single day that you have to circumnavigate until you then basically decide to shut up shop.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing that my father would say, that every day has problems and the only day you don't have a problem is the day you die.
Exactly.
I mean, that doesn't sound cheerful, but I always think of that. Life is a series of problems, but problems, that's what makes life interesting.
Exactly. And that's once you've mastered that, and what most successful entrepreneurs do, they master the ability to see the problem before it happens and then put the contingency in place or to respond quickly.
Yeah. Well, it's been great. To talk to you.
And to you.
And yeah, I mean, I love your podcast. Thank you for some time ago having me on your podcast. It was a great thing to do. And I'm so excited that I have my own podcast. I've got to, I think we're on, I think this is not maybe number 12 or so. I've kept going, and you know, sometimes you think, shall I keep going with it? But I think it's, I mean, you're the master of it. What would you say? Just keep going with it. I've got over, I had that initial, like, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, yeah, is anyone listening to this? Shall I carry on?
It's hard
Advice?
work. It's incredibly hard work.
Mm.
If you can get a team around you, that's fantastic. It makes it a lot easier. But I think if you go out and get good guests who are prepared to tell good stories, and you have the enthusiasm to want to share them, it doesn't matter if it's just one person. No, seriously.
That's exactly what I say.
It
So
doesn't matter if it's
thanks
just
for
one
listening.
person.
Yeah.
Every time
Yeah.
that listener notch count goes up one,
Yeah.
I think that's another person.
Yeah.
And the fact is that too many people want to be at the top of the chart, or want to be. It's nice to be in the Stephen Bartlett world, but however, let's go back to the fact that he was also a millionaire before he started.
I think the great thing is that I just actually genuinely enjoy it, and every time that I do a podcast, because obviously I do a bit of research in advance, and then when I do the podcast, I find out so much more about the person. That's what I'm really interested in. I think that's probably why I've ended up in family law, because I enjoy finding out about people, trying to sort out issues. And I think it is a real honor to meet all the people that I've met in my network.
Of course.
Because you've got to work as a team, haven't you, in anything?
Of course you do. And I think what's important and what's fascinating is that you have to love people and their stories. And I think one of the things, I've got a friend of mine, Paul, he's an antique dealer, but he used to be a legal exec as well. And all of us as lawyers and formers, we sit around having a drink and we look back at our time and say to ourselves, that was really the best of times, because it was a way of learning about people. And what you take away from that allows you to maneuver so many facets in life that it's unbelievable. And I think that when you're doing a podcast like this, it allows you to ask people. Because, I noticed that you haven't got any notes, whereas I've always got my notes.
Oh, no.
I've always...
I'm a barrister. It's all in my head.
Yeah, you see, my head's full of...
Well, I'm a criminal barrister. I mean, I know with civil barristers have said to me, how do you do that? You don't use any notes. I'm like, no, I can't. I have to have it in my mind, and I have to be thinking and think. You're my witness. I mean, it is a different skill, obviously,
it's
but
a completely
because of years of cross-examining
Of course,
witnesses,
yeah.
I have to be observing the person. I can't have my head in the notes. It's not
Well,
going to work for me.
that's crazy, because my brain just functions at such a rate. I'm thinking of song titles. I'm thinking of podcast episodes. I'm thinking of things. All these, even the bloody shopping list, everything. I've got everything going on. So if I don't write it down, it's like that. It's gone.
Really?
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
And so, but what I like is, my approach to life is jazz, and which is that with jazz, what you do, you start off with 8 bars of music or 16 bars of music, which then repeats. But in between those, each person who's in the band gets to solo. And with me, I always start off with a framework. But once I dispense with the framework, that's when the magic happens.
Exactly. Yeah, life is jazz. And on that note, we will finish.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that.
And see you again soon.
Most definitely.